Growing tomatoes in pots is as old as backyard gardening itself. Tomatoes transplant extremely well and are highly adaptable to most summer gardens. The best kind of tomatoes to grow in pots and containers are determinate or bush tomatoes. Their compact size and the fact that they don't normally rely on trellises or staking make them ideal candidates for the wonderful world of container gardening. Join me today as we take two popular varieties of determinate tomatoes right from seed all the way to planting. Before we begin, let's first define the difference between determinate and indeterminate tomatoes, and why we choose the determinate varieties for growing in pots. Determinate tomatoes are the bush type, compact varieties that grow max growth and yield within a single season. Indeterminate tomatoes are the vine growers. They would keep growing forever if you let them, only dying off when the first frost comes. We begin by setting up our tomato seeds for maximum germination. With your seeding tray of choice, begin to fill each of the cells with a quality organic potting or seedling mixture. I'll throw a link in the description below on how I make my own DIY ultimate potting mix right at home. Basically, any light, airy, organic mix designed for seedlings in small pots will do just fine. Fill each cell right to the top, compressing them down about 25%. Then, level them off with that same mixture. If you're doing more than one tray, or if you're seeding multiple varieties of tomatoes, do them all at the same time. It really maximizes your efficiency. But before seeding any of these trays, we gotta fill up the bottom with about 2 liters of warm water, and then let it sit for around 2 hours. When seeding tomatoes, you can actually do it in 2 different ways. The simplest way to do it is just to place one seed in the center of each cell. This is aptly named the single seed method. The surface of tomato seeds are like Velcro, and they will really want to stick together. So take your time, ensuring you have just one seed in each space. Pop those seeds down about 1 to 2 centimeters, and then cover those holes up, and you're done. Easy stuff. The method that I use, however, is known as the multi-seeded method. Here we spread anywhere from 10 to 15 seeds in each cell randomly. The advantage being is that you can seed hundreds of seeds very, very quickly, and the amount of space and soil that you save is staggering. Once your cells are seeded, simply cover those seeds with a skim coating of that same potting mix. This results in them being planted, again, around 1 centimeter deep. You don't really need to press down on that soil. It's not necessary. And just being covered is enough for those seeds to germinate. Whichever method you choose, place those seeds in a warm area with a cover over top to prevent drying out. They should germinate in around a week at 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomato seeds germinate quite uniformly and very vigorously. It's easy to see why this is the world's most popular starter plant. Normally, we'd move the tomato seeds on at around 2 weeks after germination, right when they start to get their second set of leaves. But for our tomatoes destined for containers, we grow them a bit larger. In step 2, it's time to move those plugs on to our transition pots. These would be your standard 4-inch nursery pots. Fill them with that same organic potting mix all the way to the top, compressing them down about 25%. Then, top them off again with that same mix. Again, if you're doing multiple trays or multiple varieties of tomatoes, now would be the time to do them all to maximize your efficiency. Water that tray from below, of course, and let it sit for about 2 hours. If you use warm water, the soil does seem to soak it up a little bit faster. Either way, you don't want to be planting into dry soil. You can not only damage and shock those roots, but also the holes that we need to make in our pots will not be able to hold their shape, which makes it very difficult to plant. Here we can see our Tiny Tim seedlings have just exploded with new growth. Let's dive in and plant up a single seeded plug first. The single seed plugs pop out super easy and are fairly straightforward. I take the other end of that screwdriver that we used to make a perfect plug hole for that Tiny Tim. Make it deep right to the bottom of the pot and widen it a little bit by rotating that screwdriver a few times. Place that tomato plant deep right up to that first set of leaves. Now, let's take a look at a plug with more than one plant. Pry it out the same way and gently tug those stems apart right at the base. You want to try to distribute that root ball evenly between each plant. Make your hole once again and plant those tomatoes right up to that first set of leaves. You can really see how much more efficient multi-seeding is, provided you have a need and a market for all the numbers. If we were potting these guys up for sale, we'd really focus on trying to get them even deeper. But fortunately, we still have one more potting stage to go through, so that does take the stress off. Go ahead and finish the tray, or trays, and our first variety is done. And hey, if your soil is good and wet and holds its shape well, you can actually pre-make all your holes ahead of time, freeing up your hands to deal with the plugs exclusively. For this mess of a tray of Romas, we're going to need all the help we can get. Again, let's start with a single-seeded plug. Pry it out with the flat head of that screwdriver like we always do, taking care not to break or bend that stem. For these guys that have grown long and lanky, let's remove both the cotyledons and the first set of leaves. Really concentrate on planting ones like this deep, but don't worry too much. We're going to get a chance to bury these guys later when we pot them up in their final containers. Ideally, this Roma plant would be buried right up to this level, but as we said, we'll get our chance later. On that note though, let's discuss why we plant tomatoes so deep. Tomatoes have the ability to send roots right out of their stems at almost any level. These appendages are known as adventitious roots, and they are what allow tomatoes to basically be the world's greatest transplant plant. So let's go ahead now and tackle a multi-seeded plug. Again, even the ones with multiple plants pop out quite easily. Gently pry them apart, keeping the root ball as even as possible. Plant these bad boys as deep as possible and just work your way through the tray. As you can see, it's not nearly as uniform and organized as when we transition our plugs earlier, but container gardening is really about the end game, so let's focus on that. You'll see, the plants are amazingly resilient and they will bounce back with growth. For these transition pots, we let them grow for at least 3 weeks to really get established and to fill out those trays. You can see our aromas, while still a bit leggy, have progressed nicely. That minimal foliar damage that you see on some of those lower leaves is just from them being hardened off this last week. Similarly, our Tiny Tim is just as huge. These would make great starter plants at the farm stand if they weren't destined for bigger things. When growing tomatoes in pots, bigger is always better. Tomatoes truly do grow to the size of the container, so the bigger you can go, the bigger your plants will be. For a minimum, I use 5-gallon nursery pots, the kind that you'd normally find shrubs in. You can often find them for free at most garden centers throughout the year. If you do choose to go with buckets, however, ensure that you drill drainage holes in the bottom before you plant. Line each of your pots with a layer of newspaper to prevent that soil from spilling out. And then fill each one about 75% full with a quality organic potting mix. There's a link in the description on how I make my own right at home. Grab your young tomato plant with one hand, and with the other hand, place it over top, straddling that stem with your index and middle fingers. Gently pinch that pot to coax out that tomato plant. Like we discussed earlier, now is the chance to pot these plants up at the exact level and depth that we want to grow them at. It's different for every plant and every variety, but over the years, I've found that taking at least 2 sets of the bottom leaves off really helps us to bury that stem and jumpstart these young tomatoes. Play it by ear, you don't have to, but it really does make an early difference on how these plants progress. Make a depression to the exact depth you need so that when we fill in the rest of the pot, that tomato plant is planted right up to the first set of leaf nodes. Begin to backfill with that same potting mix and compress the soil all around that young plant to ensure that it's snug. Easy stuff. This is really where the quality and consistency of your potting mix shows through. Easy stuff, looks great, and that plant will no doubt take off this summer. Much the same with our Roma tomatoes. Pop these guys out, being extra careful of that stem. As you can see, this one is quite leggy, but it does have a great whorl of foliage growing at the top. I'll pop off that first leaf node and it's good to go. Support that stem throughout the potting process, as these guys are extremely brittle at this stage. Make your depression just as before. This time though, likely substantially deeper. Hold that Roma upright as you begin to fill in and around that stem. It's not difficult, just take your time here. Being leggy might actually be an advantage for this plant, given the depth that we're now able to plant it at. That whole 6 to 8 inches of stem is going to be able to explode with roots, establishing this plant early on. By setting up the Roma plant this way, I know it's going to triple its root system in less than 2 weeks. And when those roots are firmly established, that foliage will explode with exponential growth. It's just how tomatoes work, so you have to respect their life strategy. Compress that soil down firmly, and you can really envision this Roma being a 3 to 4 foot monster with hundreds of those elliptical tomatoes that we love so much. Make sure the plant is nice and vertical, and we're ready for the final step. Our first instinct is to water these plants. And while we'll get to that, we first must mulch. Mulching prevents moisture loss and also moderates extreme temperatures. It's really important, even in container gardening. For these particular plants, I'm using a 50-50 mixture of green grass clippings and coarse straw. Lay it on nice and thick and pack it down. Think of it as an actual top layer of soil in these pots. It may seem excessive now, but in the summer months, this mulch will be the difference maker in having to water every day versus every week or less. Don't skimp on this process now, thinking your plants will grow fine. Once that hot weather hits, plants growing in black pots lose moisture at an astonishing rate. Another benefit to mulching that we get immediately is that we can now safely water from above without blasting that soil everywhere. So let's grab our hose or watering can and get to that celebratory final step. Even with this coarse watering can, you can see that mulch doesn't even budge. You're going to want to soak these plants good and well with the first watering. As a rule, I use at least 1 liter per gallon of pot size. And really, this watering will mirror how you're going to want to water throughout the summer. Deep, thorough waterings are 100 times better than watering lightly every day. Honestly, that's the worst thing you can do with potted plants. These determinate tomato plants may look humble now, but using the methods discussed in this video, we've really set them up for greatness this summer. Pots and tomatoes are a natural fit. If there's one backyard staple that's destined to grow in your pots at home, it would be a determinate tomato. Remember, plant these guys deep, right up to that second or third to last leaf node. Water well, but not very often, and enjoy the bounty that these guys will give you all summer long. For more tips and in-depth discussion on how to grow your own tomatoes at home, check out the links in the description below, and we'll see you in the next video. Hey, thanks for watching, guys. If you're getting value in this and the other series that I'm doing on YouTube, hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons if you'd be so kind, and I'll see you in the next video.